welcome to Yakima Week. One of the topics in the newspaper Yakima and the moratorium that the City Council chose to put on cell towers and transmission in Yakima as well. And my guest this morning, John Kling, explain how we might in the sky. What is that? John, would you like to tell my audience what is your background in electricity and why are you interested in this topic?
Yeah, for electrical engineering, but I dropped out of that fun stuff. I'm interested in power transmission. In fact, I serve on Pacific Power's Integrated Resource Planning Group.
Oh.
And I have power line diagrams of all over the Northwest. So I have lots of interest.
Do you keep up on the power lines and what they're doing?
Oh yes. I'm looking at the various plans that both Bonneville and Pacific and other utilities had in the Northwest.
How did this proposed new power line come to your
Some people would be.
Who is behind the planning of this and decides where to put these?
Well, the Bureau. Some agency has to be the central focus for all the decision making, and for this power line, it happens to be.
Okay. And how do you find out about the in Yakima, it's the community that started to protest new cell phone towers, and the cell phone companies were the ones that wanted to put out more. Who's behind putting this up again? Power and Light.
Power and Light, yes.
And how will it impact us as far as our rates? Why don't they just add on to the towers or the lines that we could, like string another line?
So you'd have to replace every one of them that you have already. And it doesn't put in geography. One of the taking different routes. Added to a line that's already there, you would still have the trouble with diversity in geography.
More traffic. We had 2-lane highway. Need a in case first. Exactly did you do as far as put your information or your 2 cents where the transmission line? Explain to my audience what the role that you had in government and explaining to them what you wanted to see.
Various alternative routes. And I wrote a nice letter to
you went to a spot where things were. a copy of.
Yeah, this is one of the maps. And you see I-90 and I-82. And the line will not be visible from either of these highways, but will be visible from Highway 24 as it goes from Yakima out through Moxie and out to Vernita. Provide different as far as how far by the agencies is built almost the longest route near Highway 24, which is shown here. We have a little boat, which is brown. You folks actually
How high are the transmission lines when they stick up out of the ground?
Poles may be as high as 100 feet tall. Basic issue is poles are, but to keep them high enough over the ground level, because if they get too low, they could sag into shrubbery. And the power outage back a few years ago in the Midwest was caused by power lines like 45 feet above the ground. So some of the poles that are on top of the hill may be a little shorter, but the landscape may be a little taller. Depending also on how far apart they are. If they're closer together, you have less sag between them, and so they don't have to be as tall. But your change in height, if your higher poles mean you have longer span, so you have fewer poles. So there's a trade-off in height of pole and distance apart and how many you have to do. This will be decided later this year by the Bureau of Land Management, and then the process can begin for Pacific Power to actually acquire the rights of way along this land, and then in 2014, 2015 era to build the actual power line.
I'm sure some of my audience wants to know, is this private land that they have to get right away, or is it public land?
It can be both private and public. Some of it, there will be some private land, a bunch of it will be public, and that will vary depending on where they put the location. For instance, along the Columbia River, that would be mostly under the United States Army, and so that would be public land. Whereas out here in Grant County, a lot of that would be private land.
And how tall is a transmission line compared to a cell tower?
Cell towers, like you'll see about 10th Avenue and Nob Hill, are shorter, but some of them some of the cell towers are much taller than power poles. And in fact, in some the big steel structures may have cell towers in them, and others they put on top of them. So they're in the same order of magnitude, but they can be used both. You can have both poles and cell towers on the same pole.
If some of our audience wants to comment on what their opinion is, what's the time?
So that's close. Public comment. All the writing. Because not every member of the group that actually makes the decision could be able to do it. That way
You talk about member what?
there are various people within the various bureaucratic agencies that make this decision. It's
a committee.
It's not public officials, it's people within bureaucracies, and it is a committee, yes.
Okay. So which pick choice?
My first choice was one that came close to the firing center to the south. That way it wouldn't be near Highway 24. And it would also not be next to a power line that already exists. So we have variation in geography. And then along the Columbia River, instead of out in Granite County, because there's no power lines here now, so you also have that variation in geography here. Also, along the Columbia River, you have brown on brown instead of brown on water.
And which is their first choice that they were proposing?
This one that's shown here in the yellow is the bureaucratic first choice.
And when do we find out what their choice actually is?
It'll be later this year. There is a definite timeline where we have like 6 months to decide this, but it will have to be this year. And then the fun starts for Pacific Power acquiring right of way.
If you know that your land, are any of these who are in the line of one of the proposed ones have been notified?
Every property owner on any of the properties has been notified. All property owners had to be notified.
And do they have an opportunity to
opportunity
comment
to
on that in writing as well?
Yes. What can be done on it? For instance, you cannot put a fence with wire underneath the power line and along it. You can go across it, but not along it. Because if you go put a fence along the line, you will actually pick up power.
They have a tree.
Shock. You might not like it. It's gonna shock you.
I'll have land.
Yes, I have talked to some forward to it no matter where it goes. And that's natural. Do we like having, obstructions to our view? That's part of having available. Someone has to have a power line in order to have you get back.
John, Bureau of Land Management
Right.
announces the final winner. Loser, winner. Lottery. Any opportunity at that time to have it changed?
You would have to go to court. You'd have to be challenged in federal court. Because it's a federal organization.
So, does anybody have a question for John? We have time for one question.
And part of the issue with right-of-way, and part of what you gain in right-of-way is the restriction. When the power line is inside, they will not go into trees because you don't have. So if you look at maps or satellite photos, it's easy to tell high power lines because there's a cleared right-of-way. There are no trees under it. You can have shrubs, but you can't have trees. So it's easy to see that right of way.
It's easy to see when you go over Snoqualmie Pass where the
trees are all cut away and there's a line down the middle.
Yes. My husband speculated that would be great to do snowshoeing and skiing down those hills. And
Well, and with power lines, you only need a few canyon in between.
that's it for Yakima Weekend. Thank you very much. And thank